It's my pleasure to have Steve Jong, CEO of VRIFY, and I will start with a safety share for everybody. I have seen 2 accidents past week just on the change of the weather. So I think to be very, very brief on the safety share, I think the best is to be very aware of the fast changing weather in town, in Vancouver and all across. If we can allow that, allow more time and allow more stoppage time, that would be great. So that's my safety share, and I will go with the next slide. Friendly reminder to renew your CIM National membership and CIM Vancouver membership at the same time. It is fundamental for everybody to be connected and to be member for the CIM, both for CIM and for everybody to keep the community going during the COVID time. 2 reminders are the branch that our premier event, the Student Night, will not be held this year due to social distancing, but we are committed to awarding graduate student scholarship book prizes, Turnbull Cup for the best photograph. So a reminder that grad student scholarship application deadline is November 3rd, so it's coming by next 3 to 4 days. Award winners will be announced at the CIM Vancouver LinkedIn page and by email on November 19th. Also a reminder, CIM Capital Projects Symposium runs November 2nd to November 5th. This virtual event is all about project execution, bringing together mine owners, EPCM groups, project managers, and contractors to present challenges and solutions. Register online at the following link, capitalprojects.cim.org. And this is again same thing, November 2nd to November 5th. If you want to make the presentation, and if you let us know, and if you're willing to be also a sponsor, contact Rory Slack or William Richard. LinkedIn, the LinkedIn CIM LinkedIn Vancouver LinkedIn page is alive and well, and we all hope that you guys can be willing to join the group. So to get all the news, our featured sponsor of this event is AMC Consultants. They provide great solutions to all the mining projects. I have many mining engineering friends there, so it's great to have them here. Also, Merit Consultants International, a division of cementation, so they are actually a great silver sponsor as well. Pan American Silver, same as Pan American Silver, they are great silver sponsors as well. So lots of silvers there. Also, Silver Consultants is also a silver sponsor, and we thank all of the sponsors for being able to sponsor CIM and all the students in the mining industry. As also a teacher, I really encourage all the sponsors to be also, if they have any jobs, summer jobs, to provide that to the students, and let me know. I will be able to help them to send the message across to everybody in the academic as well. So with that, I will give the podium to Mr. De Jong. Stephen he was a CEO of Integra Resources. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just saying it from the memory here. So he was fundamental to the change sale of the Integra Resources in 2018, I believe, or 2017.
Yeah, Integra Gold.
Integra Gold, yes. And now Steve De Jong is really revolutionizing the data and mining and bringing the 2 together. So without further ado, I can't say much more, and I will ask him to provide us with all of his visions and his understanding of data mining and how do we really bring this together. So,
hey, thanks Sherman. Thanks everyone for joining us today. So just before I get into it today, I want to set sort of the tone for this presentation. I'm going to go through my own experience, my own views, and the role that data has played in that, and using 2 specific examples, one with Integra Gold and some of the work we did specific to big data, and second with sort of more in how VRIFY in our business and how our team kind of view kind of data and how that can be applied, not just in our own business, but in mining going forward. I want to just make sure I'm clear with everybody. If you're looking for some sort of revolutionary idea in the next 30 minutes, it's probably not going to come. This is more just, it's almost just to share my own experience and how I think we as almost as a sector need to be looking at data. And the bulk of my own experience, I don't have a technical background, is more sort of on the investment side. And managing a team of technical people. Examples I'm going to go through today is actually looking outside of the mining sector and just how other tech companies and how other companies in general just use data and how they collect it and analyze it and sort of implement the learnings from that. Just a bit of background on myself. So I'm the CEO of a company called VRIFY. VRIFY is the best way to describe what we do is we're trying to revolutionize essentially the way that companies and investors interact with each other. We fundamentally believe that a PDF in itself, which is, it's almost comical, I'm just about to take you through a PDF presentation, but a PDF in itself is insufficient to communicate the complexities and everything that goes on within the mining sector. So we developed a toolkit based on our own experience running mining companies, raising money, meeting with investors, communicating with technical teams and communities. We've developed a toolkit that is really changing the way that this communication takes place. VRIFY has about 150 clients, from kind of early stage explorers through to some of the largest mining companies in the world. And every day our team of 50 people at VRIFY are continuing to push the limits. The idea being we want to build that platform where every investment mining decision in the entire sector funnels through. Prior to that, and I think what I'll spend most of my time on today is actually, prior to that, I was the CEO of a company called Integra Gold. And Integra Gold was an early stage explorer that made a discovery, went through to development, a construction decision, then was ultimately acquired. And looking back at sort of all the development stage companies that have been acquired in the last kind of 5-7 years, there was analysis that was shown the other day. Of the 32 companies, development stage companies that have been acquired in the last 7 years, 3 of them have gone into production. One of them happens to be Integra Gold's Lamaque mine. So a lot of my own learnings from the sector are from kind of running a company through that early stage in the exploration, kind of resource definition, kind of through the study, and then right up to a construction decision. We didn't actually build our asset, that a larger company came and took it from that point forward. But we often at Integra Gold really tried to challenge ourselves in how we use technology and how we use data to feed into our decision-making process. And that was both in how we communicated that externally to investors, but also how we just made decisions at Integra on a day-to-day basis. So let me see if I can get to the next. Just a general comment. I actually, when I was putting this presentation together over the last few days, I found a slide from a presentation almost 2 years ago. But I like to call it out because it's almost, in the conversations I've had about sort of the, I don't want to say archaic, but how behind the times mining can often be, it often feels like we get defensive and say, well, here's a bunch of examples of the different ways we use data and we use technology. I look at this slide as mining is second only to agriculture when it comes to the opportunity from kind of leveraging data and leveraging technology. I can't give you the details on how all this came together and what inputs went into this, but this is the level of digitalization on a sector, or looking at it from a sector by sector basis. Mining kind of being second only to agriculture, it just, to me, it really speaks to the opportunity that will come if we learn how to implement new technologies and continue to innovate, but really just leverage data, and data will feed into that entire decision-making process. So what you're looking at here, this is the Sigma mill. And this is a picture taken in 2015. And in the background is what was our project, the Triangle deposit. It was 3 kilometers away. To the right, you can see here the old Lamaque mine, which produced 4.5 million ounces, and then the Sigma mill, which sits directly above the Sigma mine, which produced another 4.5 million ounces. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is my kind of experience on the mining side with big data starts with this mill. We made a discovery 3 kilometers away. It was 2014, 2015. The entire precious metal market was in the tank. We were able to buy this milling facility for pennies on the dollar. It was just a few $1 million. We were able to pick up this entire facility, which was very fortunate to have a fully operational, or maybe need a little bit elbow grease, but a mill sitting that close to our deposit. Now, we bought this infrastructure strictly, or we made this acquisition strictly for the infrastructure. What we realized after we had closed the acquisition, we now had this fully integrated story where we were able to take out of our studies kind of the $100 million that would have been associated or sitting there as a line item for how much it would cost to build a mill. But what we didn't realize until after we made this acquisition is that we actually acquired 6 terabytes of data from both the Sigma and Lamaque mines. And historically, these 2 operations were run by 2 different companies, that one was Placer Dome and one was Teck, sitting literally hundreds of meters apart from each other, but never shared information. And when these 2 assets were finally consolidated in the 90s, no one ever went back and went through and consolidated this data. And the 2 databases were made in very different formats. They had different geologies. They were using different classifications in how they logged the core and everything else. So we spent about $1 million at Integra Gold going back through and just consolidating this data and doing our best to normalize the data set. Now, this is a real bonus for us because we already had our discovery and our high-grade deposit. We had the milling infrastructure, which was how we justified this acquisition. But we were looking at this big data set, and we were kind of thinking, there's no way that this mine that started operation in the 30s and shut down in the 80s, there's no way they got it all, especially if they were never sharing information with the other deposit just a few hundred meters away. There has to be an opportunity to go through here, consolidate this, apply new technologies, and maybe kind of discover some additional gold, whether it's on the fringe or identifying a trend that continues on elsewhere. So in 2016, we did the Integra Gold Rush Challenge. And what we said was, well, we've got 10 drill rigs running on our own project right now. We don't have time to go back through, but being sort of, we're in this depressed time in the market, why don't we see if maybe we can crowdsource this and the world can help us out. So we put $1 million prize out there for who could ever help us identify exploration opportunities within this data set or on trend. And it was a really interesting experience. We had about 1,500 people from 90 countries sign up for this. And we were dealing with very high unemployment rate with geoscientists at the time. But we also had a lot of kind of computer science driven teams and a lot of groups that would come together and take some mining background and maybe a geology background and a data processing background, come together, put a team and a submission in. And we ended up with, it ended up being about 150, I believe it was about 150 submissions. And we kind of got to see, it was a really unique experience because we got to see this entire spectrum from, we had one submission where somebody would rub a metal rod against the ring and hold it against the screen. And then kind of that was their idea on it would naturally be attracted to kind of where there's going to be gold on this plan map. And all the way through to what you're seeing here, which was one of the winning submissions, which was from SGS, in where they went through and they used machine learning to kind of essentially associate a probability score next to every single block for the entire project, and kind of the higher kind of the percentage that they saw, or the higher the chance of hitting, the higher the score. And then they put that into 3D and you're able to see the whole thing using a virtual reality headset. Long story short, we ended up with 20 finalist submissions. We got that down to 5, and then we did a Shark Tank style finale to really kind of pull out the best submissions. It was a phenomenal experience, and one of the most exciting parts about it was just to see all these minds come together and talk about all these different ideas. I wish there was a sort of a Hollywood fairy tale style ending to this. Our company ended up being acquired, and the company that bought us was really focused on building the mine. So a lot of these targets still haven't been tested. But all that being said, what was I think the most interesting part was looking at how differently everybody used this data. The other thing we learned is that specifically in mining, and when you're using geology, where there's very few identical geology sets, you're always subject to the bias that comes in at early stages. Sorry, as we went through this bias that is, it comes in at the early stages, you're completely subject to it, because whatever team you hire to view that data, if they view that kind of that certain granodiorite needs to be viewed this way, where someone else is looking at it and saying, well, that's 2 different types of granodiorite. We saw a lot of this as we pull these two data sets together, that's going to filter its whole way through. So I think it's one of the learnings that when we walked away, and I still believe that at some point someone's going to go back and take all these targets and start testing them, but is how important it is to, when you first set up that database, to allow yourself sort of the flexibility where you're not restricting future, whether it's machine learning algorithms or groups working with that data after that. Just as a side note, one of the other things that came from this was the next year after this Integra Gold Rush challenge, we didn't have another data set, but it had been such a successful event. When we did the finale, we had sold tickets to it and done a live event and raised money for charity. We wanted to do something else, so we started something called Disrupt Mining, and we partnered up with Goldcorp. It was an interesting experience working with a big company like that, and the idea was, we're not going to use a specific data set. Let's look at all the different problems in the industry, and whether it's reclamation or environmental work or discovery or kind of extraction, whatever part of that process, let's just throw it out to the world. We were able to use Goldcorp's bankroll for this, and let's just see what kind of solutions come from this. So we ended up, I believe it was about 150 submissions, and it was quite abstract. There was a lot of different ideas on different ways. But from that, we were able to see, again, some very simple solutions to industry problems that all they took was just a new way of thinking. And a lot of it was from people who had sort of a little bit of industry experience and a little bit of, or some more experience outside of the sector as well. Disrupt Mining went on for about I think it was 2 years, maybe 3 years. And then obviously with Goldcorp and Newmont, I'm not sure the plan for that going forward. But I do believe that what kind of coming back to it, data is going to play such a big role in how we how our industry is going to continue to evolve. So getting more into the data side of it, and I stole a few slides from a presentation I gave a few weeks ago that was very specific to resource investment and resource pitching. So as the presentation that I gave was very much like, we sit here and there are so many things that we do, and looking at it from a pitching perspective or meeting with investors, we just do because we've always done it that way. If we look at it, if you look at the average pitch deck for a company, it's sort of, you start with a title page, a disclaimer, then you go into, usually it's a management team slide and a cap structure slide, and maybe a little bit of background on sort of the commodity environments, and then into the asset. And we've just always done it that way. And the example I was trying to give, and we really hold ourselves to this at VRIFY, is we need to take a step back and stop we just be very careful to not bring the bias in that comes with experience, because experience is phenomenal, and experience is what we all need to build on to push and propel our industry forward. But with experience comes bias. So what are the ways that we can stop and actually look at sort of the facts and collect the data, analyze that data, and then implement it? At VRIFY, we often say that the presentation kind of 2 years from now is going to be completely different than the way it is today. And by that, I mean, instead of just kind of using this kind of the same format that we've always done, if we, after a year of looking at people and looking at users, especially in a digital format, interact with presentations and realize that there are certain elements of a presentation that get so much more traction or engagement than others, we need to be doing everything we can to either prioritize those or finding ways to get users engaged with the elements that we know are important to the story but are getting missed. And that's often as simple as moving them higher up, because kind of as anybody goes through any presentation, everyone's attention span has limited capacity, and it's going to kind of shrink, and attention is going to fall away as you go. So I use this slide to show kind of when we look at sort of this this collect, analyze, implement, and where the mining pitch fits today, it's sort of somewhere in a different font, upside down, sitting in the corner, because we really don't use a lot of that. And that same we can use that same philosophy or that same approach looking at mining. And again, I'm not saying that we don't use data at all in mining, and this applies to exploration or extraction or reclamation or remediation or every side of it. But I believe that there are taking more of a positive view in it. I think there are just countless opportunities to do a better job in using data and really kind of hit the pause button on some of the technologies and other things we're trying to advance and stop and just look at the hard data of what we're doing. Now, I'm going to step away from mining for a second, and I'm going to go a little bit more into, just other examples and looking at tech companies and other companies and how they use data. First is Netflix. Netflix is very obvious. From a collection standpoint, there are two ways you can really collect data. You can either ask people for their input, or you can just grab it. Things like Netflix, they do both. Netflix will ask you, what did you think of that? But the bulk of their data comes from just how you interacted with their shows. So look at some of the events that Netflix is tracking in the background. A lot of people watch the Social Dilemma show on Netflix recently, which really goes into the depths about how kind of our interactions and our engagement with specifically social media, how those are being watched and monitored every single second of every single day. But in the background, Netflix is looking at sort of when you pause, when you rewind, when you fast forward, what day do you watch content, what time of day do you watch content, where do you watch it, when do you pause and when you leave, what ratings are given, searches, and then even just browsing and scrolling behavior, how much time you spend looking and watching that trailer and so on. Netflix and these big tech companies do a really, really good job of that. Peloton is another example. I'm a big fan of Peloton. Peloton has been able to build an incredible business in a somewhat new field, sort of the at-home fitness field, or the on-demand at-home fitness. But what Peloton does an incredible job of is not only are they looking at sort of how you interact with their various classes, at the end of every class, they're just asking you. And it's really, really simple. It's a thumbs up, thumbs down, and then sort of how's the music, how is the quality, and so on. But they're able to look at that, and from that they can derive, here are the best instructors, here are the songs that people seem to enjoy the most, and so on. And all of that just feeds into their ultimate offering. And I don't want to I'm not trying to say we need to be so specific as we should be looking at how we directly take these examples from other sectors and apply it to our own. It's more just this entire approach where every decision they make is driven entirely from data. And it starts at the collection stage. The next is really just analyzing. How do we analyze this data? And it's collecting it is one thing, but when you sit there and you have this massive pool of data, what do you actually do with that? Because we now live in a world where we have too much data. So how do we break it down into sort of into a format that we can make actionable, or that we can take action from? I like the idea that, or I've actually never used the app myself, but kind of when we did our research going into this, Starbucks as an example with their app, very simplistically, they're always analyzing kind of what you're looking, what you're buying, and that kind of gets them to the point of they're able to, when you head in, you get to a store, they're able to say, here's what you should order. They've analyzed kind of everything that you've kind of bought in the past, your behavior and everything else. And they also, what they do in the background is they're analyzing external factors. So when you go in and kind of you're walking towards the Starbucks and you pull out your app and you're about to put your order in, the suggestions that they're going to make are not just taking sort of the data that you've given it by sort of interacting with it in the past. It's actually taking the weather and the time of day and other external factors, and that's feeding into it, and that's feeding into it as well. And then again, Uber is a phenomenal example of how they analyze data. Uber is constantly improving its algorithms based on the data that they're able to achieve. The one I want to get to again, and I'm going to keep coming back to it, is actually Netflix. So the issue you have when you're collecting data, and I showed you that long list of data that Netflix collects, is you almost get too much. Netflix does such a good job of, or what they've done a good job in the past is analyzing exactly like what, from all of that data, what do they actually need to focus on, with the objective being, how do they come up with something that they can actually action. What Netflix found was, as they analyze this and all of this data, their objective is to have kind of more users. So the existing users continue to pay their monthly fees, and they're able to attract new users. What they found is that if somebody watches 15 hours a month, they would be hooked and they would continue. And it seemed to be, it was almost as black, and it was quite binary. If they were less than 15 hours, if they were less than 15 hours a month, then they would tend to, then they could fall off quite easily, and they may not subscribe again. So kind of going forward, now that they've analyzed all this data, they've identified what are the key components within that, what are the key components that they should really be focusing their attention to. And then the last part of that is implementation. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen this before. It's just the automatic play the next show. And I can't remember what the stat is. It's something like 30% of the time or 25% of the time. You just naturally go into the next show. By doing this, they saw a massive jump in kind of the number of hours that users were watching, which fed back into subscription renewals. So I don't want to kind of sit here and say, here's exactly how Netflix did it, and here's what we need to be doing within the mining sector. But I do think there's so much data that we deal with in the mining sector. The bulk of my experience in my business is more on the investment side and interacting with investors, and almost digging deep into the psychology of sort of the mining investor, and understanding what they need to see and what a company needs to do to make that interaction a positive one. But there's so much data in general, but we really need to stop for a second and almost break down kind of what is that data? How are we collecting it? Are we collecting it in an unbiased way? Where is sort of bias working its way into the process, and how do we account for that? How are we analyzing it? Because mining, probably more than anything, we can get overwhelmed with the amount of data we have too. And then what is the implementation? Like, it's really easy to say, well, mining is going to be changed forever by artificial intelligence and machine learning and whatever buzzword that we can come up with. But when we break it down, I think if we start to spend more time, and I do believe this is where kind of the younger generations have such an opportunity, because they've grown up, and I should probably say we've grown up in this world where kind of computing and data is just a part of our everyday life. I think there are so many opportunities within the mining sector that we don't even know about yet. And we often tend to jump into, well, here's a new technology, or here's an innovative technique that's being applied in another sector, and I can kind of see how that applies to mining, so we should do it. And we need to take a step back and start really looking at the data, and what are the learnings that we can gain from that actual data. I'm going to pause it there. I wanted to only spend sort of 20-25 minutes talking and kind of going through, and the objective here is really just to facilitate a conversation. Again, from a technical standpoint, I don't have the answers. If we want to start talking specific machine learning algorithms that are going to be the best ones when it comes to mining, you're going to stump me very quick. But it's really just to have a conversation around data and what are the opportunities that we can see. So I encourage anyone at this point, if you have any questions, speak up. I know that there's a few that were emailed in, but maybe I'll stop there, Sherman, and I'll pass it back to you. But again, thanks everyone for your time.
Thanks very much, Steve. This is definitely inspiring. The transition from Integra and using data and really re-implementing, re-engineering what you guys did at Integra now at VRIFY. So while you were talking, I had lots of questions coming in, and I will start reading through them. We have about 20-25 minutes left right now, so we can just go through it as fast as possible and sort of touch up on them, and then sort of start the inspiration of this whole new chapter in mining, as you say. So with that, first question is, how is data being collected and used currently? How do you see it being used in the future? Maybe it's a very broad question, this one is, but how do you guys are collecting the data for VRIFY? And that's the question right now.
So at VRIFY specifically, we're in the early days, and I don't have a tech background, but our team has kind of really expanded, and we have a lot of our sort of leadership team has a lot more tech experience than I do. As this team has grown, we've sort of identified all these opportunities where we can start kind of looking at the analytics and the data. But what I've found in the last sort of two years or so, it's almost like these are all just buzzwords. And until you have people on your team who really understand what to look for, just saying kind of you use analytics and use data doesn't really mean anything. A lot of mining companies, and I'm guilty of this back when I was sort of sitting in that seat as well, we focus way too much on clicks and views and just things that aren't really, and you've got almost this whole service industry that's now feeding into that, where it's like, hey, we'll get you the most views or email opens or things, and there's so little accountability, and there's almost no bridge between kind of what companies are paying for to get, and specifically with investors, what companies are paying for to get in front of investors, and any tangible outcome, like is it actually resulting in kind of people buying stock or investing in your company or learning more and so on. So what we're digging deep on right now is just trying to understand what really kind of makes it tick. And for us, it's more focusing on engagement analytics than just numbers. Because if you have, the way we view our own business, if you have somebody who's engaged in a presentation and you're able to identify what within sort of your presentation is actually really resonating with your audience, and whether it's an investment pitch or maybe it's an internal technical pitch to a management team, or maybe it's you're trying to convince your kind of boss you should be buying this other mine site or use this new technology. If you're able to identify what part of those presentations they're engaged with, and then you can sort of extrapolate on that or build on that, that is really valuable. So at VRIFY, sort of our approach to analytics in general is much more engagement focused, because the way we view the world is if we can create a product that everybody is engaged with, then sort of the users will naturally follow, versus, hey, let's see if we can get 1 million people using it and just kind of pump them with garbage all day long and hope that sort of if we throw enough at the wall, some of it's going to stick. Yeah. So, and by engagement, I mean like how much time is somebody spending in a presentation? We've created tools at VRIFY now where they're interactive, like cash flow models. So for as an example, if you're kind of giving a company, if you're a company giving a presentation and you want to talk about your mine study, you're probably going to show a slide with a sensitivity analysis, and maybe it shows how it is at this gold price and this gold price, or this discount rate and this discount rate. So we've made tools like that, but they're interactive. So any user can go through and modify the gold price or modify the discount rate. And when you start looking at an aggregated amount of data, you can start to see trends. Hey, look, everybody is kind of using this gold price, or kind of after 1,000 people went through your presentation, they modified the recovery rates of your heap leach by this much. That's something that you should address and get in front of. And to be honest, the deeper we go into it, and we're still in the early stages, like we're sort of figuring out the best thing to communicate to our clients, and we're learning this ourselves. But we are big believers that essentially we've been going blind this entire time, and it's almost like we're all kind of presenting us, we're pitching these stories without really knowing kind of what is resonating and what isn't.
Yeah. So now with that, I had a question, actually a really good question coming in from Zoltan Lucas. What stage of mining value chain represents the greatest opportunity for application of this data? It's again, yeah, so it would be great if you had any response to that.
And sorry, what stage of is that
mining value chain
exploration versus?
Yeah, exactly. Mining exploration study stage, exploration study stage, actual mining closure, where you would see the greatest contribution of VRIFY and data in application of data.
Yeah, so I guess two things. So from VRIFY's perspective, the type of data and those sort of engagement analytics that I'm referring to, I think sort of it's almost like the type of data that we're collecting now is most useful in a pitch scenario. So if I was to align that with sort of the natural life cycle from exploration through to remediation, it's probably going to be at the time when that company is trying to finance and trying to get permitted, because that's often like you're dealing with communities, you're dealing with regulators, you're dealing with financiers, and that's sort of, if I was to kind of take that life cycle and throw on sort of when is it the most pitch intensive, it's going to be sort of around that. That's from that's specific to VRIFY as kind of taking a step back and looking at just data in general. I think the whole way through. I don't have a mining background, and my experience in the mining space is more on the exploration and kind of study resource definition stage. So I'm naturally going to say I think there's a massive application in how kind of data is used at that exploration, discovery, resource definition stage. The two big ones that come out, I think, is thinking of it more from that technical side is just exploration in general. Like if you look at sort of doing a multi-element analysis of a drill core, and then kind of we tend to look at gold and silver when maybe there's a relationship between two random elements that we're not even aware of, and it sort of maybe it increases within a certain proximity to an ore zone. Like there's all kinds of data but we need to kind of know what data we're looking for in the first place. The other one is on the more on the study stage. I'm a big believer that over time studies are going to be way more dynamic, in that you're not going to take, hey, here's my 300-page PDF of a mine plan, even though we've been drilling and kind of doing additional work for 3 years. So kind of 80% of it isn't really that applicable. I think we're going to work our way into something that's much more dynamic and is kind of changing, where you're going from drill hole into mine plan in a matter of days, not kind of years.
So thank you for that. That's really, I agree with that. It's going to be much more dynamic and much more visual and feeling with all the data, and rather than it's the 30-year-old sort of or 40-year-old type of studies that are been going on for a long time. So what are the biggest potentials for the younger generations? I know we have a lot of younger audience here are looking to make change within the industry. So I personally teach mining engineering, so I always have that conversation with them. So how do you see that as well? What's your perspective on it?
So I just think that the younger generation and the younger generation views the world differently, and I think it's often criticized for that. And I'm in my mid-30s, so I'm sitting kind of right between sort of, I guess, the next generation of mining, but sort of not the old guard. I think that can be used to their advantage. Any conversation you have with sort of, let's say, the younger generation, the 20 to 25-year-old, or when they're just kind of exiting university and coming into the mining workforce, they just view the world differently. They've grown up sort of with social media and all these tools, all these tools that we're just kind of not used to. And I guess the best example I can give is now that I'm spending more time in the tech space and not the mining space, and I've surrounded myself and we built this big team of tech people, some of the tools that they bring to the table and how you just interact with clients or organize information or honestly book your meetings in a calendar are incredibly simple and make the whole process more efficient. But I've just never been really in that world. And these are all very kind of normal things that they use. I think there are so many opportunities for the younger generation to have grown up with so many of these tools to just look for applications within the sector. Like it's easy enough to, there's obviously a lot of, there's something to be said about having experience, but there's also something to be said about not having the bias that comes with experience. So I think it's sort of understanding mining and so on, but not trying to, I think the best opportunity is not try and just sort of fit in kind of to the mining world as it exists today, because the best thing that the next generation can bring to the mining space is a new way of thinking. And that's kind of just a reality. My youngest brother is 8 years younger than me, and even the conversations we have about technology and so on, he's so much further ahead and on kind of and up to speed with kind of the tools and kind of the platforms that are out there today.
Yeah, so it's more of a revolutions within evolutions, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question is, given the machine learning examples in your presentation, what kind of teams should be formed in geoscience to optimize the use of data and digestion within the ML or machine learning algorithms? So it's more of a, I think this is very technical question. So if you have an answer to that, then or we can leave this kind of a conversation. So that's one of the questions that I thought it was very technical, but if maybe you have some perspective to that.
Yeah, so this might not fully answer the question, but my thoughts on that, and I'll use the example of exploration specifically with machine learning, is there's a lot of work being done on the scientific side of it. And if you're going to form a team that's going to do it, you have to think about sort of what does success look like? Does success look like you and your team being able to take an old data set and kind of say that you would have identified that ore body? Or what is success a real world? Is it a real world discovery? And by that I mean I'm yet to see hey, we took all this data, we applied machine learning, and it led to this discovery. And I think a lot of that is because so many of these teams that are going almost too deep on the scientific machine learning algorithm side, and not thinking about and not maybe fully putting enough weight towards how are we going to test it, and then how are we going to kind of get it out to communicate to the world the success of that test, and then sort of what is almost the business plan behind doing that. I've seen the other side of it where you kind of have groups out there promoting kind of hey, we use machine learning algorithms and so on, and I think if you look under the hood, there's probably not that much going on. But it seems like somebody, because I do believe once somebody is able to say, hey, I took all this data set, and I really hope that kind of Sigma Lamac and that challenge that we did would have been that, and maybe someday kind of that'll actually happen with those targets, that some of those targets that are still sitting out there. But I do believe when someone is able to tie together, here's kind of the data, the science, the methodical approach that we took, and then here's how we turn that into a tangible product or a business. Here are real world results that it led to, and here's how we're going to kind of expand that or scale that to the world. I think that entire life cycle of that technology needs to be thought through, instead of just thinking that an algorithm in itself is going to be enough.
Other questions. One other question that came up is, what are the biggest lessons learned studying VRIFY? I think you've answered it you've integrated your answer within all of these conversations, but what are the biggest lessons learned, and what are the changes that are you see in the industry using this? One side note that came to my mind as sort of you were talking, I've read few papers that all the drug companies are using the machine learning to come up with new uses for all the drugs, and that's one thing that I have seen in the drug industry. So something that of that parallel can be applied to the mining, and how do we use our data to come up with some sort of a new discovery? We don't have to create new data; we just have to revisit them as sort of like more with a different lens, I think. So
So to the first part of that, like at a personal level, I've learned that sort of running a tech company is very, very different than running a kind of resource exploration company. In that, when Integra Gold grew from a $10 million company to a $600 million company, the team that sort of I worked with grew from sort of 5 to 7 people. And we had a ton of growth on site, but that you're sort of from a head office perspective, you're almost fully insulated from that, because you have your GM or your VP on site, and everybody is kind of goes through that. Tech is very different. Tech, like at VRIFY, we've grown from a team of 5, we're now about 45 people. Everybody is interacting with everybody on a daily basis, and it's very rewarding in that when you figure it out, because there are team dynamics and kind of it's very different, but when you figure it out, it's sort of so much more of the success that you realize and sort of the impact of your product is a result of sort of the thinking that you've done around how you can evolve that product, or kind of continue to evolve with sort of what the data that comes in on a daily basis. Where sort of resource exploration is, you do that to a certain extent, but you're also heavily tied to the commodity price and Mother Nature. That's sort of all the success we had at Integra Gold. I think our team did an absolute world-class job in kind of expanding on the deposit, but that deposit had to be there in the first place for us to realize that success.
I see. So that's good. Thank you very much. And the biggest lessons learned using studying VRIFY or studying any business, I highly look up to you as a very successful businessman and very successful entrepreneur. So what are the potential successes in the mining industry, and how do we define the new successes in the mining industry, if that's the case here? What would you say to that?
Sorry, I missed part of that. Define you say successes?
How do you define, what is success in for VRIFY, and how do you define success going forward in the mining industry? I mean, finding new resources, of course, but what is as new successful milestones for us going forward in mining industry?
So I get for the first part, I think for VRIFY, we define success as adoption, and it's a little bit deeper than that. What we've realized at VRIFY is we've created what we believe are sort of dynamic tools that can help, if used effectively, can really improve sort of the communication that occurs between primarily mining companies and their investors. What we've realized in sort of the working with 145 companies we work with now, we can't just hand our tech over to companies and expect them to be able to use it effectively. So our business now is continuing to evolve, but we're spending way more time digging deep with companies to fully ensure that we understand what they're trying to tell. We'll actually go through a process of interviewing investors and bankers and analysts to understand what sort of we'll call it the street, but what investors and what people want to hear. Then we go back and look at sort of where's the alignment and where's the misalignment. And then once we have that, we'll kind of work with a company to build a story. And on the back of that, we'll bring the technology. And when I say sort of success for us is adoption, it's for us to have kind of continue to have this kind of increasing adoption that we see almost every day of people using VRIFY, but it's adoption of engaged, adoption of engaging content. So we want to continue to see obviously more companies use VRIFY because we think long term our goal is to set ourselves as the standard in the sector. But the only way we're going to be successful for that is if our content is truly better than kind of the traditional PDF and so on. And a lot of the content we have, it's not as simple as just throwing a 3D model into a deck and kind of some nice photos and a financial model. It goes deeper than that. But for us, like if we can create content that's engaging, that we have analytics that show it's engaging, and then we continue to see adoption across the sector, that's our ultimate goal. Success in the sector, in the mining sector, I think it's quite simple. It's if the mining is always going to be kind of a big part of our lives. We're not going to go through sort of this battery revolution, this renewable revolution, and just kind of pull the copper from trees and so on. It's always going to be a part of our life. Success for us, I think, is if we can continue to minimize the impact and sort of the footprint and the environmental impact that mining has. That I think that will continue. That'll be good for everybody. The other thing is I think we need to find more ways, like mining in so many ways. There are so many opportunities within the mining, and specifically in the earlier stage projects, there are so many opportunities to destroy capital. And if you look at the success rate of exploration and even, to be honest, development stage companies, it's quite low. A lot of that is because they're in volatile industries where kind of you might be building a gold mine and the gold price of gold might go down 30% in the next year, and that's not something you control. But there are so many ways that we can use data and technology and other things to make ourselves more efficient and sort of better stewards of capital. And I think those things two together, if we can minimize our environmental impact and be better stewards of capital, I think those two things together, we're going to see, I think that'll be just massively beneficial for the sector as a whole, and would probably lead to all sorts of kind of new kind of inflows of capital into the sector in general.
I fully agree. It's really thought, it's really well said, really utilization of capital, and how do we really allocate those capital. So with that, I have another question that came as well. How do you, as COVID has done anything or other challenges, the past year that have, gone through the whole world, is there been any, has it challenged VRIFY, or has it improved and increased the productivity and usage of VRIFY product?
So it's been really interesting. So I spent a lot of my time just talking to mining companies, and as you know, sort of most conversations you jump on a call with somebody, you spend 5 minutes chatting about sort of what's your work from home like, how's it been, how's your pandemic been, and so on. So I feel like I've got a pretty good idea just looking at sort of the spectrum. A lot of the individuals that often interacting with are kind of the decision makers of these companies. So you get to hear more about sort of like how these companies are approaching it. And then I often speak a lot about sort of my own experience at VRIFY. So in March, we were our team of 40. We had an office with 35 desks in it. So we were actively looking for more space. And then all of a sudden, kind of March, the whole world shut down. We went really quickly into work from home environment. And I feel like every sector out there, March, April was spent just sort of waiting to see what happened. And we were very fortunate at VRIFY. Like, our business is essentially a virtual kind of marketing tool, and we're heavily exposed to mining, specifically copper, gold, and silver. So those are two industries that are two of the best kind of prepared or set up industries for kind of this remote working environment we're in right now. So from a business perspective, we've been fine. So our issues are not kind of how does our business survive. Our issues have been more how do we kind of how do you grow sort of a positive culture within your team, and how do you look at things like productivity and efficiency and even mental health and all these different components to it. We've converted fully to working from home. We're leaning as going forward. We've hired people now that aren't even in Vancouver, and like going forward, we haven't sort of put anything official in place, but it's likely going to be some sort of hybrid environment where the office, which will probably be much smaller when it's all done, the office will be available if needed, because not everybody has the same working from home space. But to allow your employees that flexibility, I've really enjoyed it. I never thought I would. Just kind of spending all day, every day at home. That being said, there are certain things that need to be addressed as well. Like productivity, you're sort of forced to come up with ways to measure productivity. You can't just measure it by they were in the office from 9 to 5, which has been really beneficial to our business. But I think what a lot of companies are seeing, and specifically where in innovation is such a big part of what we do, creativity starts to suffer, because I'm not bumping into you to have a quick chat about some random idea I just had, or I heard you talking to somebody, and so on. So it's creativity is we have to kind of find new ways to address. In speaking with the mining companies, I've actually been blown away. Most of them are kind of, it seems like most of them are looking at some sort of hybrid scenario on a go-forward basis as well. We find ourselves fully vaccinated a year from now, and everyone's ready to go back to work. It seems like most companies are taking the approach that they're going to be more flexible in how they approach it.
So now I always refer to this movie called Avatar. I don't know if anybody in the audience has seen it or not. So which is fully remote, and I think the industry is going that way, with minimal amount of exposure at the face of the operation, and everybody is sort of like looking at it this remotely. So with that, I think that has been wonderful. I know that you have other commitments at 12 o'clock. So if you allow me, I'll conclude this session. It's been wonderful to hear your thoughts, and it's been very provoking in terms of the future and how we can use and start using the data, start implementing the data in a very objective and practical manner. Most of the audience are engineers here, so they all appreciate practicalities. So I always have that practicality angle to it. That's great to see from your perspective that, hey, what is our objectives of this data, and what do we want to use this data for? So, and I think it's amazing presentation. Thank you for your time. And if anybody else has any comments, questions, please let me know. We have 1 or 2 minutes before I conclude this presentation. Or if you have any last messages, Steve, for the audience, take-home message, I would be, I can, definitely allow that here as well. So.
Yeah, no, just a big thank you. I think it's organizations like CIM and sort of the work that a lot of you are doing that it's really beneficial to the sector. So I'm happy to be here. I appreciate everyone taking the time to go through it today, and always never hesitate to reach out if anyone wants to kind of have conversations around this. But Sherman,
great.
Thank you, and thanks again to everyone else.
Thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate it. I'm really honored to be talking to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you.